Hello and welcome back to season 2 of the Mediocre Marketer. Joining me today again is Matthew Leffler. Welcome
Thank
back.
you. Thank you for having me, Whitney. It's always a pleasure to be here. Happy to break down interesting legal topics that are facing our ridiculous industry.
Yes, and boy, are there a lot of them. So I would love to jump right into it and get your take on what's happening this week. Today it's Tuesday, April 23rd. This will probably be airing within the next couple of days. So, what are we watching in April that's going to impact May, June, July, going into the summer months?
There is a topic that I have been following for many, many years. It's one of my favorite hobby horses. If I'm tilting at windmills, I'm tilting at this idea of non-competition agreements. Just for those who are listening or who are watching this for the first time, a non-competition agreement is a contract between a hiring entity, like an employer, and a worker. And it really is all about how long, how expansive, and exactly what you're going to be prohibited from doing after you leave the company's employ. This is about reasonable restrictions on your ability to earn a living. Non-competes are everywhere. Over 30 million working Americans have signed a non-competition agreement, about 1 in 5 American workers. This is one of the issues that is bipartisan, hits every single economic group, and it is something that is pervasive in American workforce. So what's happened over the last couple of years has been a lot of pressure, both from the state governments and the federal government, to do some restrictions or some limitations on non-competes. What we saw last year was the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, put out a proposed rulemaking banning non-competition agreements, essentially going into 30 million contracts and invalidating portions of them. We expect today, Tuesday, for the FTC to have an open meeting where they're going to actually talk to the American public about a rule they're going to finalize. When this proposed ban was first announced, Whitney, over 20,000 people commented on it, trying to say the challenges non-competes pose for American workers. So this is one of these issues that I've been following for a long time, and we're going to get some clarity this week as to what the FTC is actually going to do.
It's a big week. It's a really big week here. So from your experience, seeing this coming down the pike is obviously, like you said, it's something that's been in the news a lot recently. But it was a really hot topic well before it made it to the news, before it was a newsworthy topic. So what else are you seeing specifically in the freight industry, in the supply chain, that other people should be watching, stories, companies that we should be following along, where there might be something that we see coming, late 2024 and early 2025?
Well, this FTC ban on non-competes is not going to go anywhere. I mean, we are expecting a lot of people to be forcing and in litigation around this. The American Trucking Associations posted a comment themselves talking about how they would fight a proposed ban. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has also come out and said they will challenge any proposed ban. The FTC itself estimates that people are losing almost 300 billion, that's billion with a B, in wages annually as a result of non-competition agreements. And if there is anything I can leave for some of your viewers that are watching right now, is non-competition agreements are more than just employment restrictions of at-will employees. You get to work for me and I get to let you go and you have to not compete with me. This is probably one of the most important issues for diversity, equity, and inclusion that's out there currently. It disproportionately impacts people of color and women as well. So if we are trying to understand how we want to see our society shaped, how we want our kids' lives to be run, ultimately, we have to look very hard at the non-competition agreements. I will say the FTC will likely lose the initial litigation around this thing. There's a lot of question about whether the FTC has the authority to actually ban non-competes. So this is an issue we're going to be following for the next few months, probably years. I would not be surprised at all if this thing ended up at the Supreme Court of the United States on appeal. I would not be surprised in any way. As for what we should be thinking about as an industry, oh my goodness, Whitney, things are rough. I think folks who are paying attention have seen this going on now for even longer than the COVID, increased demand. Is this recession of the freight industry has kind of been going on for a minute. Some of the regulations we see coming down is regulations around speed. The question is like, how fast can a truck driver drive? And in every single state in the union, there are existing regulations on speed. But the FMCSA, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, has put out a proposed rulemaking around speed. And I expect to see that rule finalized in the next couple of months. No one knows yet how fast it's going to be. I will say when the FMCSA first proposed it, they did suggest 68 miles an hour. They retracted that very quickly, but that number is still kind of in people's minds.
Okay, that's really specific, first of all. It's like a parking lot where it says 12 miles an hour. So what sort of safety repercussions are we going to see because of that? Roadway safety is something that I am very passionate about, just because there are so many lives at stake. We live in a very populated country, and we see a lot of accidents happen annually, and most of them are on interstates or highways, especially those that involve semis. So what do you foresee happening with this?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I would say, like, when you are a motor carrier, safely delivering freight on time and undamaged is challenging even under the best circumstances. Driving a truck remains one of the most dangerous jobs in this country for a variety of reasons. But to talk specifically about speed regulation, there's a really good case on both sides. So if I'm a proponent of speed regulation, here's a couple reasons why you should do it. One, it's better for your fuel economy. Two, it's better for your maintenance on your tires and your motor. And also, number three, it reduces your insurance liability. I mean, it's going to make, generally speaking, when you have a speed governed truck, it's less costly to insure those. That's a very real reason why mega carriers have moved to doing speed regulation in their trucks. On the other side, it's a question of freedom. If you want to drive a truck commercially, you are a professional driver who is, trained to operate the vehicle safely. If you think you need to go a certain speed to pass somebody else or a certain speed to go over a hill, and you're restricted by how you can do that, I don't like to see the feds reaching in further to regulate an industry that is already way too overregulated. The other thing I'd mention is you have to bring your truck into a shop to have this done. Like, you generally cannot just remote in and say, your truck now goes 68 or 65. Usually it's to take it to the shop. They think the FTC estimated about $300 per driver or per truck. That's a lot of money to be thrown around just to regulate speed. So that's a thing we're paying attention to. The other one I'll mention, and we can talk a bit more about it, is the upcoming International Road Check with the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, May 14th, 15th, and 16th.
So what's happening there? Because I'm learning right now that, the roadway safety that I have been following, just because somebody who came from the carrier side of things, anytime the FMCSA is out in the public eyes, when I'm going to be clicking and reading and diving down those rabbit holes, and I do know, I was looking at the expenses also of what it would take. And I'm thinking, the rollout plan and the onboarding of certain fleets would be an astronomical ask.
It really is.
To be able to accomplish that.
To talk about like the challenge of regulating all these trucks, most of the mega fleets have done this already. It's not that dissimilar from the ELD mandate, the idea that you're going to make me buy a subscription service. So this is really going to be, that's why OIDA and others have been against the speed regulation stuff. But ultimately, this is a fight they're likely not going to win, and they're going to have to absorb that cost. Like I said, it's good for fuel economy. There are a lot of tangible benefits, but the biggest challenge, and this is what, again, OIDA goes back to, which is if you're paid by the mile, you make money by how many miles you drive, and you slow me down, it means I have to spend more of my time and money in order to accomplish the same goal. When TFI bought UPS Freight, which is now called T-Force, they put speed regulators in there. They moved the trucks, I believe, from maybe 71 or 72 to 68. It was a massive backlash. So it's a big challenge. And so often when we regulate things, it's on the backs of truck drivers. Now, to kind of segue briefly to the International Road Check, I have to emphasize this because so few people kind of see the severity of this thing, what we call International Road Check. So to describe what this process is over a 72-hour period, a ton of inspections happen. Law enforcement officers, DOT officers across the North American continent are doing roadside inspections. And during this period of time, let's say between 40 and 80,000 commercial vehicles will be inspected. That's a pretty substantial amount of
Mhm.
vehicles inspected. 1 in 5 of them will fail. Now, I don't mean 1 in 5. Hey, you got to take that to the shop. It's got this thing. Make sure you get that done in the next 2 months. No, this is 1 in 5 vehicles that are inspected are unsafe at any speed, which is you leave this thing here until someone comes and fixes it as soon as possible. If I were in any other industry, let's say if I'm in the business of selling dairy products and I have 5 gallons of milk, and Whitney, I say, I have 5 gallons of milk for sale. One of them is unsafe and dangerous, but I'm not going to tell you which one, nor do I actually know which one it is. This level of mediocrity is something that is deeply concerning to me, and it should be concerning to
Right.
everybody when you have vehicles out there that are unsafe at any speed.
Mhm. Right. And I think to kind of tie those together, um, as far as regulations are concerned, my big what's going to happen next is the software and the technology that will be used to regulate certain things, because I was part of the carrier industry when ELDs were rolling out. So
Mhm.
I remember calling my customers and saying, look, this is going to happen whether you like it or not. We've partnered with a company. Now, I'm not going to say the company because it's things have changed, but you could go in and edit those digital logs. So you
This
could
is a
go back and
uh,
add in and completely fudge everything as if you still had a pencil and a piece of paper. So, to me, there are certain ways where you can mandate things, but some people are still going to find ways to cut those corners to accommodate their own, um, I guess, their own preferences. And at the end of the day, does that really make it safer? Whereas there were other ones where, there were different types of ELDs. There was the plug and play, and then there were some where you had to go do a full install. And then that
yeah.
one obviously took a lot longer. Somebody that was very specialized had to come out, connect it to the truck. And that took a bit of time. So you had to wait at some point, like everybody has to come back in. So it might be months before your entire fleet has been onboarded with that particular piece of mandated technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And the idea for ELDs was it was going to have safer trucks. And I think the data
Right.
is still unclear if you do have safer operating vehicles. But I think you bring up a really interesting point, which is, you as a truck driver, you're just waiting for the next regulation to come down at you.
Right.
And with ELD mandate, one of the really interesting things around safety and just general cybersecurity is in America, we have self-certification, which is to say, if I make something and I want it to do something for my customer, I say, oh, no. I validated this thing actually does the thing. There's no one over my shoulder validating that I have actually made the thing that is supposed to be safe and not something you can break into. And that's one of these big challenges we have is so often our technology outpaces our ability to regulate it. And if we have ELDs that are out there that are like, just unsafe or not very secure or not the latest software, there are nefarious actors that are out there that will absolutely take advantage of this, which is the same kind of concerns we have around autonomous vehicles. It's very important that we go in this thing eyes wide open and make sure the regulations match the outcome we want to see. If you're
Mhm.
a technology company and you're running off of investor capital from the VCs, your prerogative is growing revenue. It's how do I grow revenue? You're not thinking, how do I make sure the American public is safe from all of these robots and technologies that are absolutely everywhere?
Yeah, it's definitely something. Like I said, I'm curious to see what's next, because there are so many moving parts in the supply chain right now, and that's just one segment. That's just carrier
Mhm.
compliance and safety. There are so
Absolutely.
many things that span far beyond that domestically, and then you open to like an international, global perspective. There's a lot that's happening.
I think, and to build off your same point, like, so when you're in a bad market like this and you're a motor carrier, one of the first things that you will save money on or is to not spend money on is to defer maintenance, to say, okay, let's extend that PM for another 2 months. Let's extend it for another 10,000, 100,000, 50,000 miles, whatever you want to do. The reality is that that's where you start seeing this type of creeping up of safety on the roadways. When people are barely able to cover their operating costs, this is a very, like I was talking to Ken Adamo about this from DAT. It's a scary thing for me when I know that the loads are moving at a price that is beneath the operating cost to run that truck. Like that's a thing that, again, we don't really think about it, but you don't want your truckers to move things at a loss. Like it's not a great
No.
idea. So there's a lot of things happening, and it's interesting to kind of watch them unfold, which is why I'm always very clear. I welcome the robot overlords. I will betray the humans when the time is right. Fear not. Fear not.
Well, that's good to know. And now we have our featured snippet.
Well, I mean, this is an interesting. So, robot trucks, like this has been science fiction for the last 2 decades. Like the
It
idea you'd
has.
have a truck that doesn't require human intervention. But I always like to kind of characterize the story of, you don't know where you're going unless you know where you are. You don't know
Mhm.
where you are unless you know where you've been. And when we look back in the Wayback Machine, one of the biggest innovations was the independent contractor movement after deregulation in 1980. Essentially, how do I save money? And that ultimately cost truck drivers and material handlers and mechanics and everything. But the work that autonomous trucks will be able to do, when your two biggest costs of trucking company is fuel and labor, this is the thing that you are very eager to understand. And last year, we saw FMCSA put out what they call a supplemental advance notice of proposed rulemaking, a very silly little legal term, but around level 4 and level 5 automation. Level 4 is a remote operator, think drone pilot. Level 5 is
Mhm.
autonomous assistant, somebody who's remote but can help law enforcement get documents or communicate with somebody with
Right.
like a headset or something. And then you see the governor of California veto a bill that was pushed by OIDA and the Teamsters, which was going to force a human being in an autonomous truck, and he vetoed it. And then just a couple of days ago in Kentucky, you had a law that was going to stop autonomous trucks, and the governor, it was actually going to allow autonomous trucks. The governor vetoed it, and then the Congress pushed it through. They overrode the veto. These robots are here now. They're moving freight now. It's
They
just
are.
it's just intrastate within one location. But when that door opens, when that ability to move things interstate occurs, the world changes fundamentally, and you can't go back. And so this is, again, this year, it's a lot of really important things that will determine the next several decades, I suspect.
Yeah. And from my understanding, something that made like recent news was the first like cross border into Mexico autonomous vehicle. And so that was a big one to watch. Now I'm thinking, what other mode will we be adopting next where we're kind of eliminating the need for I, and also there's something about going cross border and all of the regulations to
Mhm.
go across the borders that makes me just very nervous of how things could go wildly awry.
Well, it goes back to the same idea of the self-certification for ELDs. If you're an
Right.
autonomous trucking company, who needs to look at your code? Who needs to understand your safety precautions? Again, there are actors out there globally who would not be too opposed to doing things that could cause catastrophic things in the United States. So
Right.
I suspect that when these doors of automation open, it is a trickle at first. Maybe it's cross border, maybe it's just intrastate, maybe it's just yard trucks or hostlers or sprinters or whatever, like local things. But it goes quickly. I think the middle mile will see a pretty significant automation. So travel center to travel center, parking lot to parking lot. I think we're going to see the autonomous buying trucks become way more pervasive, and then the autonomous forklifts. This automation, like these trends, they're super trends in every industry. You can't opt out of them. They are coming regardless of our opinion of them.
They are, and they're very cool to watch. I don't know if you've had the chance to see anything up close and in action, but at some of the recent trade shows, I've seen a few things doing their jobs, and it is really interesting to watch. Whether or not I'm lightly afraid of some repercussions of it all, but
I think I remember we were at Manifest together earlier this year, and
Mhm.
there was a presentation done by DHL, and one of the things that she presented about was warehouse workers and how they have 40 to 70% churn annually. And the quote that I remember so vividly was our reducing our dependency on labor. That's a very interesting way of saying, man, it is so hard to have humans doing things. Wouldn't it be nice if those humans that were doing things stopped doing them, and something else that didn't need a meal period and didn't need training and didn't need all this other stuff could just do it for me?
Yep, that's it's going to be a whole different cry of outrage that we will watch also unfold over the coming years.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. So I guess in the time that we have left, I would love to know, what are the good things that you're seeing happening? What are the things that you're most excited about that are not like red flags that we're
Yeah.
addressing, but good things that you're seeing entering the marketplace?
I really want to focus on the non-competition aspect of things. I mean, this is such a novel idea, and I want to emphasize to everybody who's watching now what it's actually taken to get where we are.
Mhm.
You have 30 million people, from people who are working as nurses and anesthesiologists to freight brokers to salespeople to general managers or local managers. I think the numbers are like 30% or 40% of people who have non-competes are making under $15 an hour. I mean, this is a crazy thing that we have brought
Right.
into our society. The idea that an employer who can say, you're at will, I fire you because it's Tuesday, and that's the end of our relationship, can say, for the next year or 2 years, you have to tell me, or you have to make very sure assurances that you're not going to compete with me. And if you do, I'm going to sue you. I mean, there are lawyers. I mean, I have the stuff on the wall. I mean, that is how I'm trained to trap you in a box, and that's what lawyers do with non-competes.
Mhm.
And they're vastly overused. But the reality is, when we started to talk about the proposed ban by the FTC, we kind of knew going in it may not be enforceable, that it might
Right.
just be an exercise in futility, which it's so easy to get cynical when you say, I tried and it didn't work. But there are 20,000 punches to that wall about non-competes. And
Right.
even if the ban doesn't last, there are other options. There's things like the Workforce Mobility Act, which is in Congress, that would also ban non-competes. But this is by far the biggest issue facing American labor today, is who can tell me what I'm allowed to do? We're not talking about non-solicits or non-disclosures or non-disparagements. I
Sure.
have problems with all of those things. But non-competes, this is going to be a very special day, and it'll be great to see the FTC come out with a final rule and see how the market reacts to it. Because my goodness, wouldn't it be nice if people could leave their job if they're terminated for whatever reason, and they can still practice their craft and not worry about being sued? Absolute
Right.
bonkers.
And so to continue that conversation, because I know it's something that you also mentioned, is non-competes do hit certain minorities really
Mhm.
hard. And I feel like that's a piece of the conversation that's a little bit quieter than the rest. And so I would love to learn a little bit more about, what does that mean? Because there are some people, there are some, there are just some people in the workforce that it hasn't impacted them. So, like myself included, I don't know what the possibilities are and aren't, knowing how a non compete could change my future. Now, I do know a lot of people that are under them right now, and most of them are 2 years, not one.
Yep. That's right.
And a
That's
lot
right.
of people, because the supply chain is such a close knit community, I know many that have had to leave the industry
Yeah.
while they wait to be able to come back. It's not just this is a competitor, but the company has defined their own idea of what a competitor really is and what that, um, I guess, the threat level would look like. And so they've had to excuse themselves from an industry that they're passionate about to wait it out to then come back. But what does that
Yeah.
mean for minorities specifically?
So there's a really interesting set of kind of data, but let me just kind of back up a little bit and talk about the different aspects of the non-compete. So a non-compete has a duration, so 12 months or 18 months or 24 months. It has a timeline. Then it has a geographic area. So your city, your state, your
Mhm.
nation, the world, they're all over the place. And then it has a description of the word business. Okay, what is the business that I'm not allowed to do? Even if the document isn't written perfectly, they can still be enforced against somebody who violates them. And how does enforcement work? Let me explain to you what we would do if I found out somebody was violating a non compete as a hypothetical lawyer. Well, the first thing I do is I validate that they're there, maybe through LinkedIn or social media, and then I send them a cease and desist letter. And the cease and
Mhm.
desist letter outlines what I will do next, which is to say, I will file a lawsuit, get an injunction, and force you to quit your job. And you're going to pay for my legal fees. I'm also going to send a letter to your new job. I'm going to tell them that I believe that they are tortiously interfering with my contract with you. And as such, I will also sue them. The first thing that typically happens if that letter is received is you get fired that day. because most employers want to see a copy of any post-employment restrictive covenants.
Right.
And this is what happens next. We get judgments against you of tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we force you into bankruptcy or we force you to move away. And either way, our main goal is to not only keep you out of this competition, but to starve our competitors for talent. And when it comes to let's talk with women first. There's a lot of data around like how women negotiate employment contracts with a hiring entity, whether it's compensation or time off or whatever. It's a different kind of calculus. Most of the time, you are given this document after you've accepted the job. So you're already in this onboarding phase.
Right.
And you're so excited. You got the thermos, you got that great sweater, maybe got a cool vest, and then you get a non-competition agreement. And you have no time to call a lawyer. Most people don't know who a lawyer is that would take this thing for them in that time span. And you're forced to make a decision. Do you sign it or do you not sign it? If you don't sign it, you don't get a job. That's the reality of it. So for women specifically, it is a way to obviously keep wages where they are, but also prevent you from going off and doing something different. Same with people of color. If you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to go do something, you're going to be stopped by a non-competition agreement. And just the threat alone is enough for people to just simply not do it. And we lose great talent in every industry because we're too scared to fight somebody on a non-competition agreement, because we've seen the horror stories of people who lose their jobs, lose their houses, lose their cars, go bankrupt. And that's what the FTC's comments, those 20,000 comments, many of them had stories just like that.
So what can people do proactively to protect themselves?
The reality is, don't sign a non-competition agreement. I have had so many people over the years who have come in and said, I have this amazing offer and I'm so excited. It looks great. And we see that there's a non-competition agreement. If you cannot negotiate that thing away, you will be bound by it. Even if you think the feds might come and save you or the state may come and save you, don't bet on that. The best defense you can have is to understand what these things are and refuse to sign them when you are presented with them.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. And I think empowering people to ask the question, no matter how uncomfortable that may feel early in the process, I think you'll get a really good feel for the company pretty early on based on how they respond to, if you've had a good interview or if you're getting close to the negotiation phase, just ask.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the advice I give to people is, if you are in the idea of changing careers, the things that I would ask is like, what's the next steps? Like, you're going to put together an offer, whatever, or we're working on the offer. The things you want to ask for, you say, hey, I would like to get a copy of your handbook, and I'd like to get a copy of any, post-employment restrictive covenants that you might have me execute, just so that you can go in without wasting all of this time with interview after interview after interview, only to be presented with a document you can't sign. There's an idea, it's common psychology about the lost cost fallacy. You keep pumping in your time with this hiring entity and you see something that's really, really bad, like a non-compete, but you've already spent all this time and they seem like great folks. Maybe we just go ahead and but the sunk cost, just move on. I wish there was a law, Whitney, that would tell employers, if you're going to use any post-employment restrictive covenant, any non-compete, non-solicit, non-disparagement, non-disclosure, you have to put that in the job description so that applicants can go, oh, that looks dumb. And then the market could help decide. They benefit by the secrecy that they have around the non-competes and non-solicits.
Survival of the fittest of job descriptions.
I mean, the thing is, like, we don't have schools that are teaching kids how to do this stuff. Like, you go to college, you go to trade school, no one's saying, hey, here's what a non-compete looks like. Here's what it will do to you if you sign it. But you and I know we have friends that had to leave the industry or go to an adjacent industry in order to provide for their families. When that's bonkers. Like, it's like dating somebody and then you're breaking up and the other person says, hey, I hope you do well, but do not see anyone else like me, because if you do, I'm going to sue you. And you're like, oh, well, that's really unreasonable request. But we do it every day with our employers, which, again, it's absolutely bonkers.
I know. And if you do it, then it's like getting the bill that says, I've billed you for every minute that we've spent together, and now you have to pay it all. Like,
that's right. We're just in a different level when it comes to, like, the history of working in any country or working in America is, there's an ebb and flow of workers' rights versus, a corporate power. The non-competes, the fact that they're in every single industry and that it's, over 30 million people that have signed them, there's a problem. I mean, Jimmy John's, the sandwich company, made their people sign non-competes. Like they're pervasive, they're everywhere. And they're not a great tool to drive retention. If your goal is to be a good employer, what I recommend is don't use a bunch of legal contracts to force people to stay with you out of fear. Maybe make the job a little bit more enjoyable. Maybe a flex day or a jeans day. That might be more conducive to driving retention as opposed to very, very pervasive non-competition agreements.
Right. Well, I do appreciate the information because I know I'm not the only one that isn't completely educated from front to back about the entire issue. And there's always like more questions that I know I could ask, but and maybe that's something we'll do as like a follow up after today
Absolutely.
to kind of debrief what's happened.
I think that's a great idea because we can walk through the next few stages of this thing because we might be at the end of the beginning, but make no mistake, there's a long road ahead of us.
Yeah. Well, before we close, question of season 2, I'm not going to ask you about the biggest mistake you've made in your career because we know that about you now.
Yeah.
What is one book that you would recommend somebody read?
I would say Raising a Modern Day Knight. It's a book about fatherhood and my faith, Christianity generally. I can't remember the name of the author, but I've read it several times. It is easily one of the most important books that I've ever read. It really has helped me not just be a father, but to be a better son. And I think anybody who's in this business, we all need to learn how to give grace liberally and often. And it's a fantastic book, and I would highly recommend that.
Awesome. Thanks for the recommendation. Well, that's our time for today. Thank you so much for helping me open season 2 with a great episode. It's been wonderful having you back on.
I'm happy to be on anytime. Thank you for having me, Whitney. I look forward to many, many more episodes and some collaborations, I suspect, in the future.
Sounds like fun. All right. See you next time.